Hey guys, I want to talk to you today about the character sheet. So what I'm going to show you today is the current prototype of the character sheet. Not everything is on there, but a lot of it, most of it's on there. There's a couple things I'm working on to sort of reflect stats, sort of, because stats don't exist in this game. They sort of became largely superfluous because everything's skill-based, but I wanted to kind of give a nod to stats and make them both descriptive aspects as well as mechanically important without actually having stats. It's a thing. It's a design choice. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I want to show you where we're at right now. This is the first time I've ever shown anybody outside of our little team this character sheet, so it's kind of a big deal. Again, this is just a prototype. This is not the final, but it's looking very similar to what the final one's going to look like, I'm going to guess, because it's pretty useful. So let's have a look here. First of all, up here, you've got the Broken Empire's logo. Huzzah, look at that. And the name of the game. We have name, race, sex, culture, career, XP. These are all very, very standard. Any game out of the 80s is going to have this stuff, and that's kind of what this is tailored to look like as well. So what isn't here is these new areas for descriptions, which I'm working on right now. So it's not a game-changing thing at all. It's just something I'm playing with to sort of add a little bit more stuff to the general description of the character. More to come on that later if it actually goes anywhere. I'm not sure if it will. Portrait, there's a little spot for the portrait for the character if you wanted to put an image in there. If not, then we have personality traits. So these are based on the personality traits from Pendragon, and they work kind of similarly, except it uses D100 instead of D20. And also, you're never forced to use these. These are always, as the rules exist right now, these are always options. So it's all carrot and no stick with personality traits. Essentially, how it works is, actually, before I get into this, these are temp terms. I'm still testing this. I'm still working out what exact terms are going to be in here. Like I said, these were cribbed largely from Pendragon, but not all of the Pendragon stats are really applicable in this, and there's some that I want that wouldn't be applicable in Pendragon, etc. So it's not just a complete ripoff. It's taking the idea of the personality stats. So how it works is, you've got a number here, and you can either choose the number at character creation, or you can randomize it. There's ways to do that. But each of these is a pairing. So let's look at trusting and suspicious. So this is a pairing of opposites, right? You're either trusting or suspicious. How it works is you have a number in here, and let's say it's 60, okay? What that means is there is a 60% chance, if you want to use these mechanics, of rolling trusting. So if you roll 1 to 60, if you decide I'm in a situation, I don't know what the character's going to do, and I want to let the dice tell a story, and you decide, okay, I'm not sure if I want to believe this NPC who's saying things to me or not. Is my character more trusting or suspicious? Well, if you have a 60 here, that means that if I roll 1 to 60, it's going to be trusting. And if I roll 61 to 100, it's going to fall on suspicious. So the bigger the number here, the more likely the left side trait is to activate, okay? You can get critical results, and critical results automatically increase the trait towards the area that it criticaled. So if I rolled a 33, which is a critical result under 60, for trusting, this would increase that number by 1d4. So it would go from 60 to either 61 to 64. But if I rolled over it, let's say I rolled a 77, now it's going to essentially decrease that number. In other words, it's going to make it more likely that the right side is going to happen next time. So if I criticaled on suspicious by rolling a 77 on a 60 here, that would mean that I minus 1d4 from that number. See what I mean? There's also things, what we don't have in the sheet yet is little boxes, little check boxes here, because right now there's a mechanic where we're still playing with the idea that if at any time you as the character, or the player rather, want to roll a personality trait and be bound by its outcome, in other words, I don't know what I'm going to do, I don't know what the character's going to do, but let's see. I'm going to let the dice tell the story. You can roll, and whatever that personality trait that you pick, whatever's applicable in that moment, whatever that comes up with, if you agree to be bound by that, then your next action will take a plus 10, right? So it's a little carrot thing. We're still working this out. It's pretty fun so far. It's pretty cool. It gives people a feel like they're really playing this character rather than themselves. It's kind of, there's a bit of a feeling of wild abandon with it, which is kind of great. It's been fun in the test, but we're still working out the details. So that's where we're at with that right now. as I said, these traits may change. We're still working that out. Now let's get to the core of the game, which of course is the skills. So the skills are divided up into categories: combat, adventuring, social, lore, and then the magic skills, which are bind, strands, and piety. So most characters are going to have to worry only about combat, adventuring, social, and lore. The only time you worry about binds and strands is if you are a spellweaver, and the only time you worry about piety is if you're a godbound. So there's not a ton, but there's enough that cover virtually everything you can do in the game. There is nothing you can do with a stat that you can't do with a skill. That's another reason why stats are gone from the game. Let me talk a little bit about that before we go on. So a big inspiration for character design and creation is Mithras and RuneQuest in general. And in Mithras, how it works is you have you've got stats and you roll stats, and those stats are important to help. Really, what they do is they start every skill with a base percentage. So like I don't know, the bronze skill in Mithras, which is basically all of your like just raw strength, that comes from, I think, strength and size. You take your strength and size attribute, you put those together, and that becomes your starting percentage chance in that. And then later you go on to all of these processes, kind of like I do with culture and previous career and life events and things like this. And that will increase those skills at your direction. So all the stats do is give you the base value. And then after that, after character creation, the stats kind of are superfluous. They don't really do anything. It's a nice snapshot to look at the character and say, oh yeah, okay, strength 15, intelligence 18, wisdom 2. You get a nice snapshot effect. That's true. But honestly, in this game, you are more defined by your skills and your personality and also your talents and stuff, which we'll get to in a second, than you are by stats. But that said, I do intend to put in sort of this little nod to stats, which is a little character creation aspect that I'm working on right now. But that's the reason why stats don't exist, because I realized after character creation, stats are kind of useless. Again, if you need to do a strength roll to see if you can, I don't know, lift a boulder, you would use might for that, or possibly even endurance. It depends on the context. Let me show you that again. So to lift a boulder or to like smash down a door or something, you might use might, or you might use endurance, right? Again, all context based, but that's why there are no stats. Everything is determined by skills, but that doesn't mean that your descriptions of the character don't actually matter mechanically. It does matter if you're a big hulking brute or if you're a very, very smart person. But that's expressed as skills, and it's expressed as you go through your culture and your career, your previous career, and life events and things like this. Anyway, so that's a deal with that. So in combat, we have detailed but general is what I'm going for here. So dodge, and then the 3 melee skills: fast, medium, slow, and then might, missile, and thrown. So dodge is anytime you want to throw yourself out of the way of an attack. You do not throw yourself to the ground on dodge. This is a type of defense you can do in combat that allows you to literally dodge out of the way. The disadvantage of dodge is that you have no chance of getting a riposte, right? Like with some of your melee skills, there's a combat maneuver called riposte. And if you get 5 or more SLs than your opponent, in other words, if your net SLs in the combat exchange is 5 or more, one of the combat maneuvers you can choose is riposte, which is an immediate free attack against them. So that's kind of cool. You can't do that with dodge. However, the advantage to dodge is that you can dodge missile weapons, whereas the only way to defend against missile weapons with a melee skill is if you have a shield, right? So there's that. Then fast, medium, and slow. This just means essentially light, medium, and heavy is what it means. But the way that the game is implemented, fast and slow seem to work better than light and heavy. So fast is your things like daggers and short swords and rapiers and things. Medium is, broadswords and morning stars and maces. Slow is your big two-handed weapons, your big battle axes and your two-handed spears and things like this. Missile is bows, crossbows, that sort of thing. And then thrown is spears or bottles or whatever you want to do. Then under the adventuring skills, we've got athletics, which is, your swim, your climb, all that kind of stuff. Endurance is anything that requires raw constitution it's often used as a resistance skill, but not always. Locks and traps, fairly self-explanatory. You want to deal with locks or traps. Perception is being able to, perceive things. Ride is riding any mount, typically horses. Sailboat, if you are on the water, this is a skill you'd use for that. Sleight of hand is anything to do with legerdemain or palming things or doing anything deceptive with your hands physically. Survival is very useful on the road. It's kind of your ranger skill. It's finding food and shelter in the wilderness, all that kind of stuff. Stealth is being very quiet, right? Track, again, in the wilderness, to be able to follow tracks. This is really useful in journeys as well. Willpower is exactly what it sounds like. It's often used as a resistance spell against magic and certain other effects. Then we've got our social skills. So we've got Deceive, Insight, Inspire, Intimidate, Perform, Persuade, Protocol, Seduce, and Wit. These are all useful in different ways depending on the context of the situation, but they are kind of your tactics for use in a social encounter. Excuse me. So Deceive is obviously lying, being deceptive, passing yourself off as someone you're not, disguise. Insight is your ability to detect lies, or your ability to just get a sense or a read on someone, to get a sense of what their liked or disliked skills are, right? These are skills that are better or worse to use on a particular opponent because of their demeanor and who they are. Inspire is, rousing speeches and pulling at the heartstrings. Intimidate isn't just, I'm going to bust your chops. It could also be command. It could also be shaming, like reducing someone to tears. There's many different ways to intimidate people. Perform is anything to do with acting or dancing or singing or anything like that. All of this is a really valid thing to do, especially in a social situation, right? If you're in the court of some king and he asks for a song from your homeland, perform is the skill you would use to do that. Persuade is obviously pretty self-explanatory. Protocol was once known as manners, and it was once known as courtesy, which is what it's modeled from the One Ring. The skill is courtesy, but protocol just basically means your knowledge of how to cross the T's and dot the I's, how to do the correct thing in the correct circumstance. So that has kind of a wide range too, and it's different from persuade or inspire or anything because it's about using very specific ways of handling things to different people. Seduce is any sort of sexual innuendo or romantic innuendo to someone who would be attracted to you. And wit is anything to do with like witty repartee or making a joke or all that kind of stuff. And I've got detailed descriptions of each of these skills in the game, so you'll know what they are, because it is very important for everybody to understand what these skills do, because it's possible that someone might think that they're doing a persuade when the GM might think it's actually an inspire or something. So that's why it's important that everybody's on the same page about these, but that's easily done. It's like a session 0 thing where you basically go through and you explain what the game means, right? What the terms in the game mean. Then we get into the lore skills. These are anything Ancient lore is anything like history or myth. Arcana is anything to do specifically with magic and the weave in particular. Commerce is your knowledge of how to turn a profit, how to run a business, how to make your money go further. Common lore is very useful. This is just, what do I know about the general stuff around here? Craft practical and craft artistic. These are your crafting skills, obviously, but it's divided up into practical things like smithing or repairing armor or making arrows or stuff like that. And then craft artistic is anything like poetry, making a sculpture, anything to do with the artistic side of things. There are many ways to break down skills in any game. This is how I've done it. I wanted something that is, as I said, both detailed but general at the same time, because the last thing I wanted was a huge, giant list of like 150 skills to choose from, because that's just overwhelming. But these, they all fit on a third of a page, so you can see exactly what they are, and they handle virtually anything you can do in the game. Divinity is knowledge of the gods, churches, religions. Heal is very useful. Heal is not just first aid and treating wounds, but also helping people recover from incapacitation, and it can also deal with dealing with infection. So heal is again, self-explanatory, but it's very useful. Nature-wise and street-wise, these are specific knowledges. So nature-wise has anything to do with when you're in the wilderness. Now, how does this differ from survival? Because nature-wise is about the lore and the specific knowledge, whereas survival is about the physical activity and the practical things you need to do. So nature-wise, for example, would be very useful when you're trying to find the right berries to concoct a potion that might heal you, right? Or prevent disease or something like that. Streetwise is similar. Streetwise is knowledge of the street, but knowledge of like the underworld, but it's also like you could do a streetwise roll to sort of like get a sense of the word on the street with a particular group, right? So it's kind of social sometimes, but you can't really use it in a social, you can't use it as a social tactic in a social encounter, but it's more for like gathering information, right? And then there's one here for wise. You can also add wises as you go. This is inspired by the Burning Wheel. Just the idea that if at any point you come across a situation where you think, I think we really need to have a specific knowledge set. Well, that's what the wise would be. You would say, okay, well, in our game, dragons are really, really important. Okay, well, then you could have dragon wise here, right? So it allows you to expand as you will. Then we get into the magic skills. So binds and strands are what the spell weavers use. I've talked about this in the magic video before, but essentially it's a noun and a verb. You put them together and that'll give you a chance. And along with your description, that'll set a magnitude, which is how offensive to reality the spell is. And you fuel the spell with enhancements like range and target and potency and whelm, which is the difficulty to resist the spell, and all of these things. And then you roll, and you might have to spend a resolve in order to mitigate the weave. So it's complex, but not complicated at all. But what they are is verbs and nouns. So the binds are change, conjure, control, destroy, and witness. So change is to literally change something, change the nature of something, or change the appearance of something. Conjure is to create, to bring into being. Control is to literally control, but control could also mean defensive, any kind of defensive spells, like if you're putting up a magical shield or something like that, which would be a fairly high magnitude spell, actually. That would be a control spell. Destroy is to cause damage to destroy. Witness is perception. I perceive, I see, I know, I divine, right? That's what witness is. Then we get into the strands. Air is anything to do with, well, the air. It also has to do with... I forget exactly what I said, and I don't have my book open now, but beasts is animals. Body is anything to do with a human body, typically, the humanoid body, the player character body, typically. And then you've got earth and fire. Fire also deals with light, and it also can deal with strong emotions as well. Plants is anything to do in the natural world, plants, trees, herbs, all that kind of stuff. Spheres is raw magic. Spheres is the dimensions, the planes of existence, raw magic. Spheres is what you use if you're summoning something from a different world, like summoning a demon, which you can do, and really bad idea, but you could do it through spheres. You could also use spheres to create a magic missile if you wanted, but again, that's a very high magnitude spell, so you're inviting a lot of weave backlash when you do that, but you can do it. Spirit is the soul, the undead, anything to do with that. Thought is anything to do with the mind or imagination or illusion or that sort of thing. And water is one of the other elements as well. So those are the skills. Oh, and then we've got piety. So piety is an interesting skill. Only godbounds have piety, and piety is all about devotion to a god. Piety changes. It is the only skill that changes regularly through use. That's why we have starting here instead of total, because when you make your character, the only score you know is the starting score. Once you start playing, you don't really know what your piety is. I mean, you can kind of track it a bit when you roll because you'll know how much piety it's costing you, but you're never really going to know how much piety you're gaining back from performing acts of service to your god, which is how you get piety back. So it's an inducement for cleric characters to be always trying to work towards their god's aims and helping the church in the aims of the god, because that will give them piety behind the scenes. But otherwise, it works similarly to how Weave Magic does. Basically, the godbound asks for a miracle, and then he or she puts together the miracle costs, kind of like a spellweaver would, and then the piety is rolled, and based on the outcome of that roll, will determine whether or not the miracle is granted, and if so, how much piety is gained or lost from that roll. So that's how that works. Initiative down here, I think I've explained this certainly in the Me, Myself, and Die Season 4 episodes. Towards the end, enemies have static initiative, but players roll, and it is every round, but it is a die type, D4, D6, D8, D10, D12. And right now, the standard enemy initiative is 4, which means that if you start as a starting character with a D4 initiative, and you don't improve that when you're making your character, then you're only going to go before the enemy 25% of the time, because PCs break ties. Okay, so initiative is important, as we've discovered. You can also seize initiative by use of resolve, which we're going to get to in a second. But yeah, that's how initiative works. As I said, the average is 4, but enemies can range anywhere from like 2 to 8. And if you're talking initiative 8, you're talking like a preternaturally fast thing that's almost impossible to go before. They're rare, thankfully. Okay, then we have resolve and fatigue. So the resolve track is how you track your resolve. And what is resolve? Resolve is your inner resolve. That's the name. It's your inner sense of strength. It's your will to go on. It's all of that kind of stuff. And you use it to affect rolls in the game. You cannot use it to re-roll. That is an old idea, which has since been jettisoned. But you can use it to seize the initiative. You can use it to give yourself favor. And favor is basically you can use it either before the roll or after the roll. So if I had a skill of 40 and I wanted to spend resolve to make that roll better, I could do it before the roll or after roll. If I do it before the roll, I could spend up to 3 points in total, by the way, of resolve or favor on this skill. So if I've got a skill of 40 and I want to bump it up, because right now I'm going to succeed less than half the time. It's less than 50. And I might say, well, you know what? I'm going to spend 2 points of resolve to get it up to 60 for this one roll. Okay, you would do it, and then you would mark a slash in that box there, because this tracks your resolve, and your max resolve would be blacked out over here, so you wouldn't have any more boxes than you have access to, basically. But when you do that, great. So you get plus 20 to the roll, and then let's say you succeed. Let's say you rolled 17. Well, that's 1 SL. That's not great. You succeeded, but it's only 1 SL. And if it's an opposed roll, that might be important. So you could, at that point, spend your 3rd point of resolve if you wanted, because remember, you can spend up to 3, in order to increase that by another SL, right? You have lots of opportunities there, lots of options. You don't have to do it at all. If you've got a great skill and you roll great, you don't have to spend resolve at all, but you do have that option. Now, resolve is precious. It doesn't just immediately bounce back with a short rest or anything like that, so you have to be careful about how you use it. Resolve is hugely important for spellweavers, because what they use resolve for is to cover the spread between the SL cost of the spell that they are casting and the SLs that they have achieved through their roll and through magical devices called threads and through any expertise they have. They don't have to spend resolve to make a successful spell, go, because as long as you roll out your skill, it will work. But the real question is, what is the quality of your success? Because that will determine what kind of roll you're making on the Weave reaction table. So that's why resolve is really important for spellcasters. Fatigue is what you take on the road, and fatigue eats into your total resolve. So travel is tiring, and how that is reflected is by eating into your max resolve. So the more fatigue you take, the less resolve you will have access to. So you kind of get it from both ends if you're not careful. You could get fatigue coming in from this side of the track, and you could have spent resolve coming in from that side of the track. So that's why it's very important on a journey, especially, to be looking for places of refuge, places of respite where you can try and get some resolve back. And that's built into the journey system as well. Then we've got these. So these are attributes. So we do not have stats, but we have attributes. And these attributes are max resolve, which is the maximum amount of resolve you have access to, which you determine at character creation. Toughness is the bonus you add to your wound die or death die when you roll. So when you take a hit, basically, the immediate outcome of that hit could be the incapacitation of that location that got hit. And if you have toughness, you're going to add that to that D10 wound die. Because if you roll the total amount of wounds in that location or less, then that location is incapacitated. So toughness, if you got a toughness of 2, let's say, basically what that means, in a location, you can take 2 points worth of wounds and not really have to worry about incapacitation. But as soon as you get over that, then it becomes an issue. And the same thing with the death die. The death die is if you have wounds over your lethality level, which is here, now you're in danger of dying from that, and toughness helps with that as well. Recovery, every wound is tracked separately, which we will see here. You can see on the hit location chart here. Every wound is tracked separately, and every wound recovers at a different rate based on how it is treated, how it is healed, or if it is treated at all. Some wounds aren't. Your recovery is your base recovery for all wounds. Everybody, I think, starts at the 30, and then you can bump that up in character creation, and you can bump that up as you go along as well. And a really good heal treatment to a wound will set a wound with a better bonus. Also, if your recovering in a clean, quiet place, that's going to help. If you're trying to recover in a terrible, dank dungeon, that's going to be a penalty to. And the real issue with recovery is that if you ever fumble a recovery roll, that wound becomes infected, and that becomes a whole other problem. Then we've got encumbrance threshold. This is how much encumbrance you can carry before it starts to eat into your max resolve. That's what that is. There's also a total amount of encumbrance you can carry, period, right? You can't carry the world. And the total encumbrance is the encumbrance points that you have. Staggered threshold and staggered. Staggered means this is kind of the death by 1,000 cuts. So essentially, if you take more than 10 wound points in any location, you're now staggered. And staggered is -20 to everything you do and -1 initiative die type to a minimum of D4. So it's bad. It's, as I said, it's death by 1,000 cuts. As soon as you heal some points back down past that threshold, you're no longer staggered. You're fine. We've got injury here. You track your total wound points, mostly for the staggered condition to break in. And then if infection sets in, you need to track how many days have passed since any infection has set in, but there's easy ways to do that. Okay, then we have an area for talents. And talents are very specific. They're kind of like feats in other games, right? I can do this very specific thing in this circumstance to make me good at this kind of thing. So there's a bunch of them. There's a whole bunch of them. Armor penalties. I'll come back to armor penalties in a second. Let's look at the hit location table here. So the basic hit location, this is your ones die. So when you get hit, if somebody bests you in a combat round and they hit you, the ones die of that roll is going to determine the general location. So if it's a 6, it's going to be the right arm. 1 to 5 is the body, 10 is the head, okay? Now, there's also detailed locations, which I just realized are not on this page. See, I'm glad we did this because that's something that got left out. There is on my non-fancy character sheet, right beside this is also a sub-table that just lists detail locations. So for example, in the body, there'd be a sub-table that's between 1 and 10 of chest, stomach, or groin, right? So that is not mechanically necessary, but it's really cool to mark that as a wound. So for example, if I take a puncture in the body, yeah, I could mark it as a puncture in the 3-point puncture in the body. But that's not as cool as saying a 3-point puncture in the stomach, or God forbid, the groin. So I'll have to talk to my guys to make sure that little table gets added in here somewhere to make it all nice and clean. See, I'm glad I did this video because I didn't even notice that before, that was missing. So good. So this is your hit location charts. There is a combat maneuver you can have, you can earn called Choose Location, in which case, if you are successful and you've earned enough SLs based on the weapon you have, you can choose whatever location you want. So just because the head is 0, doesn't mean you'll never crit in the head. A lot of people have pointed that out. They're like, well, wait a minute. If the head is 0, you never crit in the head. Well, first of all, that's not true, because if you have a skill of 30 and you roll a 30, that is a critical success. So a headshot is there, but that's still like a 1% chance. But you can choose location to get to the head if you want, right? And again, that's not always the best thing to do. Most smart people wear helmets. And so hitting someone in the head is not always necessarily the best thing to do. If they have a shield, you're going to want to get around that shield. You're going to want to circumvent shield, maybe. Depends. Many, many different combat tactics based on the enemy and the circumstances. But here we have an incapacitation area. This is just if that location is incapacitated, you just check that so you know it's incapacitated. This is your lethality level. That's the number of wound points you can take in that location before it becomes at risk of killing you. This is the type of armor you have. The armor points, which is the value that gets reduced. It helps reduce incoming damage. Encumbrance is the encumbrance value of that piece of armor. And sundered, you check that if you have sundered the armor. That is a special thing you can do. If you're about to take a wound, you can choose to sunder that armor, which destroys the armor, but you don't take the wound. It's sort of a last-ditch attempt to save yourself, and is a little nod to the narrativists out there. This is Sim Light, after all. And then you've got the wound section here. You record each wound individually. I think we're going to need more in the body section too, because I suspect 3 won't be enough, but that's okay. We will do that. WP is wound points. That's the value of the wound. And RB is the recovery bonus. As I said, every wound recovers individually. At the end of the day, basically. So do you have a situation where you've got 5 wounds and you have to make 5 rolls at the end of every day to see if it recovers? Yes, that can happen. And it's also very tense because, as I said, if you critically fail a recovery bonus, that location's wound becomes infected, which is a big deal. So it sounds tedious, but it's actually tense. So I quite like it. And it doesn't take any time at all. It's just a quick bookkeeping thing. Boom, boom, boom. Again, we fall on the simulation side of things with this game, so there is going to be things like that. That's what you get. That's what I always talk about, the difference between speed of play and detail of resolution. As soon as you move towards detail of resolution, you lose a little speed of play. But for me, what we get out of that is so worth it because I love the idea that each of these wounds are a real present threat, a clear and present danger to each person. Armor gives you penalties as well as encumbers you. The specific penalties depend on the type of armor and where you wear it, but they could affect your athletics, your dodge, your endurance, perception, sleight of hand, and stealth. This is just a section for shields. The size of it will determine the AP, the armor points of it, and the encumbrance of the shield as well. Shields are great because they provide armor points to everywhere in your body. So they're really, really, really useful, but they could be circumvented as a combat maneuver. And then we get down here, the weapons. So the weapons have a name and a type, which is based on what kind of type they are, fast, medium, or slow. Then we have your percentage of attack and parry. The reason why it's divvied up is because shields often give you a bonus to parry as well. So if I have a broadsword and a shield, my attack, let's say my broadsword skill is 50. I would put 50 in here, but if my shield gives me plus 10 to parry, I'm just going to put plus 10 to parry there. So I'm going to put 60 there, just so I can see at a glance, right, when I'm parrying with my sword and shield, it's actually 60 instead of 50. I like to have things duplicated in parts of the page just to make it easy to reference and to remember that, oh yeah, right, don't forget this. Don't forget, you've got a shield, right? This is the base damage the weapon does. And then here, these four things are the combat maneuver costs of the weapon. Choose location, I've already described. CS is circumvent shield, to get around someone's shield. Dis is disarm. You have to hit someone in the arm in order to use that. And T is trip. You have to hit someone in the leg to use that. Different weapons have different costs for these. The smaller and faster the weapon, the cheaper the choose location and circumvent shields are, but the more expensive the disarm. Well, I shouldn't say disarm and trip. Some weapons are really good at disarming, like rapiers are really good at disarming, but worse at tripping people. You know, that kind of stuff. So that's how those weapons are balanced. Each weapon has an encumbrance, and some weapons have reach. And reach just basically means it's between 1 and 3. Most of the time it's going to be 1, like if you've got a spear and shield kind of thing. You've got a reach 1, which does two things. It gives you a plus 10 for each point you have against the enemy's reach. So if I've got a spear against the guy with the sword who has no reach, I get plus 10 to my combat skills against him, right? Both attack and defense. Because I have that reach. Also, if I have reach on someone, when they charge me, I get a free attack at them before they come in. So it's kind of good to have reach weapons. But yeah. All right. And then notes for anything specific to that. Combat maneuvers. These are not all the combat maneuvers we have in the game. There are more. There are... I'm so tired. There's unbalance, there's drive back, there's bypass armor if you get a critical, there's riposte, there's disengage, and I think that's it. And they all have a cost too as well. So that is page 1 of the character sheet with a few things missing. My new little stat-based character descriptors up here, and of course the detailed hit locations are missing there as well. But on page 2, which is the flip side, and we do have a pack of these character sheets included in the starter sets. Goals. Goals are how you increase your character. This is how you get better at things. There are short-term, long-term, and shared group goals. By pursuing and completing these, you get experience. We had to put languages on the back right now because we couldn't figure out how to fit them into the front, but languages are lore skills. Languages are important if you are talking to different races or if you're talking to different cultures. Each culture has a different language. There is the common tongue, of course, because that's a fantasy trope, and it's just very, very convenient to have that. So there is a common tongue, but you also will be skilled and trained in your own language too. And it's important for various specific circumstances too, like if you are doing a ritual, and you're trying to, affect someone on the other side of the kingdom. Well, You could have an arcane tether to them. You have to have an arcane tether to them in order to do that, but their true name could be that arcane tether. However, you have to speak that name in their native language. So there's little things like that. Fraying are fraying points that are really only of concern to spellweavers. It's a serious concern to spellweavers, and many spellweavers have spent lifetimes trying to see if there's any way to reduce fraying, but no one has as yet been successful. And then life events. This is an important thing in character creation. Everyone has an origin, a youth, and a recent life event. These give you certain bonuses to skills, but also give you little moments that have happened in your life which serve to help not only tie the party together, but also to provide certain goals for you as well, if you choose to do that. Rituals and prices. So I'm not going to get too much in the weeds about this, other than to say that when you cast a ritual, there's always an associated price. And there's a weave reaction that's called advance the timer, and every time you advance the timer as a weave reaction, that means you one of your rituals, or many of your rituals perhaps, get closer and closer to paying the price of that ritual. So rituals are very much delayed payment kinds of spells. They're big, powerful, incredibly, like these are the kind of spells you could cause a tidal wave to try and swamp a town, like happened in season 1. That is a ritual. But the price of that is going to be just extraordinary. So it's interesting. And then resources here. We've got supply dice, gear, ammo, and medical. These are taken from games like Forbidden Lands. This is by far the gear supply die and the wealth thing here. This is by far the most non-simulationist thing in the game. Gear is abstracted. The way it works is you've got a gear die and it takes up 2 encumbrance points. But it possesses whatever you would have, reasonably, whatever this character would have. But every time you produce something from your gear, you have to roll that die. And if you get a 1 or 2, it reduces, so that you might not have something next time, right? Or rather, once you get down to D6 and you roll a 1 or 2, that's it. Your backpack is empty. So it is very, very anti-simulationist, but it is a thing that I really like from these other games. And it just adds tension, as opposed to writing down, yes, I've got pitons or pythons and a hammer and chalk and rope. It's assumed you have anything that your character would have, but you have to roll after you procure it to see if that's affected your. It just adds a cool little gamey aspect to it that I really like. That's why it's in there. Wealth as well. I'm still going back and forth on this one about wealth. There's a really cool wealth system we've designed that is anti-simulationist. It absolutely is. It's very, very hand-wavy. It's very close to something like Burning Wheel would do. But it works, and it abstracts wealth while allowing characters to be very wealthy without having to count how many platinum coins they've got in their pockets, right? I quite like it because wealth basically abstracts the idea of not only physical wealth, but also your reputation and your word. You know, someone who is wealthy, it's not because they're carrying around big bags of gold. And that's in any time period, in any world, basically. It means they have access and they have connections and they have their word. That's what credit is, right? I promise that I will pay this back with a little interest. That's wealth. Right? Or having investments that are valuable. That's wealth. But I'm not carrying my investment certificates around with me. So wealth is kind of neat because it takes into play kind of reputation as well. We're still playing with it. It's cool. We're working it. We're the game's still in development, but this is an idea of an anti-simulationist thing that I like. And I haven't 100% decided if it works or not yet, but with the rest of the game. So far, so good, but we'll see. Then you've got items just in case you do have separate items that have to be called out from your gear and your weapons and armor. That's where they would go, and they have encumbrance points. And then notes, just general notes. So that, my friends, is the character sheet as it exists right now. As I said, we are still developing it. The rules are still being finessed, so things will change, including the couple things that I noticed on this character sheet just doing this video. So that's what it looks like. If you have any questions, by all means, you can write them on the comment section in the Kickstarter, or I will try and get back to you, or one of my team will try and get back to you. We are doing very, very well right now. I think we may have just broken the pledge amount for the VTT. Let me refresh my Kickstarter page here. This is $229 on October the 8th, and oh my God, we are $48 away. As I record this video, we are $48 away from unlocking the VTT Foundry integration. So get out there and, buy a cloth map. Or something. Anyway, that's it for me for right now. I hope that you enjoyed that and that it was useful to you. I know that character sheets are really important for people to get a sense of the game, so I hope that that answers some questions and makes you excited to play. Certainly I am. All right, thank you, and I will see you next time.